Okay, welcome back from lunch, everyone. If we could take our seats, we're going to begin our next session.
1 minute.
Yeah, gentle reminder. It takes longer than it is.
Oh, I know. I'll come stand up there. I know.
Will it stay for you?
It'll stay.
Okay.
It's fine. It is now 1:45, so take your seats. Okay, yeah. Push them away from the treats back there. Jen's here. All right, you have 20 seconds to find a seat. Yeah,
Advance the PowerPoint? Do we just say next slide?
I think this has something to do with it. I'm pretty sure you can click this. I've seen people do it from back there. Okay, we're gonna do this. Welcome to session 2. Yay! I know, I feel like we've had many other sessions, but just a lot of other things. All right, so welcome to session 2. My name's Maddie Webster. I'll be moderating, and I'm here primarily as a friend of Fairstead. I'm also a PhD candidate at Boston University. And this session's going to be very interesting to all of us, but myself in particular. I'm writing about Black Bostonians' historic preservation efforts, particularly Elma Lewis's effort to reinvigorate Franklin Park in the late 1960s. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about this other reinvigoration effort. So today we'll be hearing first from Karen Mauney-Brodek, who will be presenting Once-in-a-Lifetime Opportunity to Restore Greenspace to Boston's Franklin Park. So she's going to present for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have another presentation by Jen Mergle called Olmsted Now, Greater Boston's Olmsted Bicentennial Focuses on His Justice Legacy. So I'll introduce them both now, and then they'll give their presentations, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. And please wait to speak till the microphone gets to you. Okay, so first up, Karen Mauney-Brodek, sitting up here. Karen is a president of Boston's Emerald Necklace Conservancy, working to restore and improve the Emerald Necklace's 1,100 acres for all. For 2022, she initiated planning with Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site and more than 100 local and national partners to spearhead Olmsted Now, Greater Boston's Olmsted Bicentennial, a season of collaboratively generated offerings from April through October focused on parks as a platform for more equitable, vibrant, and verdant neighborhoods. Other key Conservancy projects include efforts to restore lost parkland to Franklin Park, described in the presentation she's about to give, and a major revitalization of Charlesgate Park in partnership with Charlesgate Alliance, public agencies, and other partners. Karen is a board member of Preservation Massachusetts and served as a member of the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation Special Commission last year, which completed a report recommending improvements for the management and operations on behalf of state parks. Very impressive stuff. And then we also have Jen Mergle. Jen is a nationally respected contemporary art curator and cultural leader dedicated to her hometown of Boston. Over the past 2 decades, she's organized over 50 exhibitions in professional roles at Harvard, the Addison Gallery, the ICA Boston, the MFA Boston, and most recently for the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, where she now serves as Director of Experience and Cultural Partnerships. Mergle graduated summa cum laude from Harvard University, received her MA from Bard Center for Curatorial Studies, is a fellow of the Center for Curatorial Leadership, and is currently also a mentor for the international program of the Association of Art Museum Curators. And with that, I'd like to welcome Karen to give her presentation.
Hello, can you hear me? Great, great. No mute, unmute situation here, so that's great. Well, first of all, I'm super thrilled to be here. I'm so excited to see this happening. We all have been planning this for 3 years, and it's just great. And I really appreciate everyone that worked so hard to make this happen. It's very exciting to have this here in Boston and to recognize and celebrate this work. I am going to give a presentation which I have now retitled, Mitigating Mid-Century Mayhem, the Restoration of Lost Land, the Emerald Necklace, because I know that this is not a unique story here in Boston. I grew up, in fact, down the street from some parks in Atlanta, Georgia, where communities successfully fought off most of a highway that was proposed to build through it. So this has happened in a lot of places. And so I am going to talk about Franklin Park and this opportunity we have right now to restore parkland. But I'm also going to zoom out a little bit and just show you all of the places along the Emerald Necklace that we have done this and we are doing this, and I need to recognize all of the folks that we work with to do this, because it is not like it's so sweet that we're like, oh, this is what Karen did. No, this is what Karen does with a million other people. So I wanted to thank particularly some folks that have worked on the Shattuck project. So excuse me as I list some names, and I'm gonna thank Ben Taylor, my board president, and an amazing group of folks that talk every week to move this project forward, many of whom are on this list. Governor Dukakis, Governor Michael Dukakis, Governor Bill Weld, Professor Ted Landsmark, Louis Elisa, Fatima Ali Salam, Sarah Freeman, who's here in the audience, Joanne Robertson, Elena Saporta, John Linehan, Louis Bailey, Margie Greville, Betsy Ridge Madison, Susan Stacey Thompson, and Julia Damiano and John Bailey. So this takes a village. You guys all know this, that this takes a lot of people, so I really want to recognize all those folks. And then that's particularly on the Franklin Prop project. So let's, I advance. That's my job. Okay. So many of you may know the Emerald Necklace. I think, unfortunately, it's done in such a naturalistic, wonderful way that sometimes not everyone does. Not everyone would realize that it's the Emerald Necklace. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because I am where I am. But you know, the park is still largely intact, but there are significant changes, and many of those came about in the 1950s and 1960s, and I'm going to go through a little bit of what we all know are the reasons for that: domination of the car, the suburbanization of America, the disinvestment in cities, racism, all the things, right? But here are some of the places that I'm going to talk about today, particularly focusing on Franklin Park, but I wanted to put it in a larger context. And actually, if we really wanted to talk about all the places the necklace has been changed to subordinate park and subordinate the species that Reverend Mariama talked about this morning, we'd probably have to paint the whole map red, because there's lots of places that we have hardened. We have essentially widened roads for cars. We've done that throughout the necklace, but I'm going to talk about some of the main places where we've done that specifically, powers, and also places where we've managed to reclaim some of that mistake. So, I joke, it's not your mid-century teak coffee table. This is the bad side of mid-century. So to tell you a little bit about who the Emerald Necklace is, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Conservancy, the Emerald Necklace is a wonderful park system that Frederick Law Olmsted designed, but it doesn't fall within one power, one agency. There's not one person that we can lean on, that we can advocate to make a change. Instead, we bring together all three. So it's the City of Boston, Town of Brookline, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation, affectionately known as DCR. And then also new alphabet soup members recently, MassDOT, and a lot of other agencies that all have a piece in this. And so the Emerald Necklace Conservancy works to bring together all of those organizations to unite towards one goal. And we've had some really great work towards that over the last 20 years. We're actually a relatively young conservancy as far as conservancies go. And we've done a tremendous amount of tree work. That's something that we've been doing to bring together all of the needs of our trees in the Emerald Necklace, and various other projects. We have a wonderful visitor center. I hope some of you get to check it out on Saturday. It's a little bit of a secret because it's so historically appropriate that people don't notice it's there. But we recently put out a bright green banner that we hope we don't get in trouble for. The first project I'm going to touch on, and I should definitely point to Arlene Levy in the front row, who was very, very involved in the Muddy River Oversight Committee for many years and working to make this happen well before my time here in Boston. It's also the undoing of a parking lot. So you know that the Emerald Necklace was designed. It's not a natural thing. This was all shaped, and Powers decided to shape it again. So in the 1950s, Sears said that they needed a parking lot in front of their distribution center or they would leave. I like to pause and say, they still left, remember, for next time. And we had a parking lot over two sections of the river, and rivers don't like being in a pipe. And there was a series of mistakes were made, lack of maintenance, and the river flooded its banks, and shut down the Green Line, caused tens of millions of dollars in damage. That's when they pay attention. So you have to make sure you add up all of the damage when it happens. We get photos like this. There's a picture I don't think I have in this presentation of the basement of the MFA and the ship section where they have ship stuff, and it looks like they're in the water, but they're in their basement because it got completely flooded. And it led to the founding of the Conservancy, essentially an organization that realized it needed to come together, and park groups and organizations up and down the river came together and realized they needed to speak with one voice, and also led to this restoration project. And that project is now being delivered by the Army Corps of Engineers. And so it's great, it's slow, it's expensive, but it is needed. But it is also half a loaf. It is only half of what really we need. It includes a tremendous amount of dredging. It did remove the parking lot, so that's awesome. We should recognize that. We need to take the wins, because otherwise it's exhausting. So it did remove the parking lot. It did reopen the river. People are like, wow, there was a river there. And that's great, but we still have a lot of restoration work to do. But this is one place that there was a paradise, then there was a parking lot, and now there is a paradise again, and we have to recognize that. And it's a tremendous amount of work from a lot of individuals in this room and elsewhere, so we have to recognize that. I was reminded about this project, which was completed right when I started, so I added it in. It's not in your paper, which I'm sure you've all already read. The Casey Arbor Way overpass was an overpass. We were in love with them at a certain time in this country, and it had to go over essentially some train tracks, but that has now come down. It is a boulevard. It has continuous bike paths and pedestrian zones and well-marked intersections and all those kinds of things that we dream about. It's a lot of pavement, and there definitely are people in our universe who think that maybe it could have been a little smaller, but it's really good, I think, that the overpass has come down for people to be able to understand the continuity of the necklace. I'm going to talk a little bit about Charlesgate. So this is this central point that connects all of Boston's park systems, and it was built as the first piece of the Emerald Necklace by Olmsted. And many of you may know the project, and you may know the project in drawings and images, but what it is today is actually a really I don't even want to call it a shadow of its former self, but it's been really heavily changed. And this is what Charlesgate was before. In fact, I just an hour ago spoke to someone who talked about how this was the most beautiful part of the necklace, and his father talked about it. It's one of those spaces that was very, very different. And then, we had our way, and you're going to see the current situation. I hear that when the Beatles came to Boston, this is where they stayed, but that is not the way the neighborhood sort of, is heralded today. So we crucified it. We essentially put Storrow Drive along the side of it. We put the Bowker overpass over the top of it. It seemed very important to move cars in and out of the city, and as you know, parkland by many may be seen as free land, that you don't have to purchase new land if you want to build a school or a hospital or a prison or some other public element, and this happened in lots of places. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to use for both this project and another project, because I hope that these are things we can learn more about, we can get better at, as we can bring the forces of good together to utilize what is essentially a WPA era that we're all walking into right now, with funding coming from the federal government to do the kinds of things that need to be done. So over time, this landscape was really changed, and today this is what we have. And it is a park that doesn't have really amenities for people. You may just try and walk through there as quickly as you can, because there's no reason to stay. There are no benches. We aren't sure, but when the park was originally built, there were amenities. There were benches. Sorry, not originally built, excuse me. When the park was restored, after the Bowker overpass was built over it, there were benches, there was planting put down. But we think because the DOT had to maintain the overhead structures, we think that over time, essentially, there was a process of erasure. And those elements had to come out because the equipment had to back up, and therefore we basically have this denuded park in the middle, and then we have fringes with occasional grass. But enter a community that I think had enough. The Charlesgate Alliance and other groups have gotten together, and the Conservancy. I'm an architect and a city planner, so I'm a sucker for these kind of projects. And we've been working really hard to restore the heart of the park. That is where we started. We didn't dream that we were going to have the kind of opportunity to influence two big infrastructure projects, but lo and behold, the 1950 stuff, which never was that great when it was constructed in the first place, is all falling apart. So this is our moment. You should go wherever you are, wherever town you're in, you should go survey all of the parks, all of the things that were put in the park, and just find out how destroyed it is, because they're all coming up to the end of their useful life. That's the term that architects and engineers use, and come up with a plan that you want, because otherwise they're going to show up and tell you what they're going to do, and it isn't necessarily what the community wants. And so we're ahead of this one, and we're a little behind on the Franklin Park project that I'm going to show you. So the great news is that in area number 1, which is a DOT project, there is the second worst bridge in Massachusetts. So they have to spend tens of millions of dollars renovating it, and so by showing them other opportunities, we can influence that, and the same with Area 3. So we've been, working on this area. There's tons more information. I'm not going to be able to talk about it all today, but this is the area now, and this is what it can be when we can release the Olmsted Bridge that is still there. It was that well built that they couldn't get rid of it. Isn't that great when it's more expensive to remove than just fill around? So we can release the bridge, and we can reopen the end of the Muddy River. The last 250 feet of the Muddy River has been put over under Storrow Drive, and it can be released. And actually, DOT has included this in their plan. And sometimes you can convince engineers to do the right thing if it makes sense from all sides, and we've been working really hard to make that. You probably can't even tell the Muddy River enters the Charles here. It's like the least celebrated thing ever, but this is what it can be. And the Esplanade and the Emerald Necklace can be reunited, and I think this will come to pass in the next couple of years, 2 to 4 years, because essentially the bridge is coming down, and it was supposed to be in construction in 2023, so we're continuing to push on that. I'm going to show you a couple more shots. Okay, so Franklin Park, the largest jewel, the most important jewel of the Emerald Necklace, as Olmsted, as I'm butchering the Olmsted quote, but it's an incredible park. It's over 6 times larger than any other park in Boston. It is a tremendous amount of Boston's parkland, and I think a lot of people think it's so big. It's okay, we can all share. This is where the Shattuck Hospital is currently located in Franklin Park. It's a great hospital. It provides services to folks in need, particularly a lot of addiction treatment. Also, the Department of Corrections has a lot of its services here. And essentially 2 years ago, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts announced they were taking it down, and they kind of told us what they were doing with it. So I want to just put in context a little bit what the Franklin Park context is and the City of Boston context. And this is an analysis that we did that actually I think Jen Mergle is going to go into a little bit more detail next. But this analysis we did as we were planning for this year and wondering how we, through the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, through this time and this opportunity, can we work to make these parks serve communities that need it the most. So we did a real analysis of the BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, children, and elderly, throughout Boston, and what we knew, but was confirmed for us, is that Franklin Park is a very, very important space, a very, very strategic space for us to do that. So what does it mean? It means that all of Franklin Park is actually important. And then we thought, well, let's look at it. So a lot of times people think Franklin Park is enormous, but what we know has happened here, and I'm sure has happened in parks in all the cities that you hail from, is that parts of the park have been made less public. Not bad, but they're just less public. You can't go into the zoo most days for free. There's a cost there, and you can't wander in. You shouldn't. They're like lions and tigers. But it is closed, and it's not free and open space. We also know the golf course is not free and open space. And I'm showing you Shattuck Hospital, and then the maintenance yard. That's the park's maintenance yard. It's really important, but it serves all of the parks in the entire city, and it's in Franklin Park. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that certain sides of the park are far less penetrable to the public than the other side. So a lot of community members from Jamaica Plain, which has a lot more of a permeable, green, open side of the park, has been saying, oh, there's plenty of room. The park is plenty big. Certainly we can provide space for another use. So what am I talking about? So in 1950, the hospital was built. Apparently there was a whole bunch of backdoor meetings when the Parks Commission was essentially forced to provide this land to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It wasn't just one meeting. Sarah Freeman can give you the details. And the land was made available for the purposes of treating infectious disease and creating a hospital for chronically ill folks. And essentially embedded in that is if it's no longer working, used for that kind of a public health purpose, it should return to parkland. Well, the Commonwealth essentially, I'm going to actually go back to this. So the Commonwealth determined that the hospital was in bad shape and it was going to be too expensive to renovate. It was a much better idea to instead rip it down and move most of the services to part of Boston in the South End. And then they said, but we still want to hold on to the land. We don't want to actually spend any money on it. We're going to lease it out to a private developer for 99 years, and we're going to ask them to provide 75 to 100 units of housing for the formerly homeless. Really important need. And provide those wraparound services. Because we're going to provide no funding for that, that developer will probably have to build some other things to make some money, to pay for the services. So no one can actually say how big it's going to be, what it's going to be like, but there is, right now, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts it's going down a path to issue a lease for this project. Now, housing for the formerly homeless is so important. We all know it's important. My staff has Narcan training. We know. We've seen it. We get it. And we said, well, is there another way? Is there an opportunity that we could restore the park, but also provide these services? Because we don't want to be the no, it's hard, and it is a real place that that I think park advocates, environmentalists a lot of times get pushed. As not being for sort of the social services, and I could talk a long time about the housing challenges we have with displacement. I mean, in the questions, maybe we can touch on that. But we don't want to be there, so how can we find another opportunity? So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts did not do an alternatives analysis. They did not look at other sites. A couple times they said, well, Karen, it's just so hard to build these things anywhere. We have to do it here. And I said, I know it's hard, but that's kind of what we do. We do hard things, right? Anyway, so we partnered with Northeastern University, who's been amazing, and they provided a couple of different projects to us. One is that they analyzed a lot of sites in the area, and we discovered, lo and behold, just outside the park, 18 acres of land, also under the Commonwealth of Massachusetts jurisdiction, where for the last 20 years, the Commonwealth hasn't built the new bus facility that they were supposed to build. And when we brought this up during the process, they said, forget about it, you're crazy. That project's been stuck in the mud for forever, it's not going anywhere. Lo and behold, they're now in design. So, yeah, because, I mean, you don't have to be it's been pretty obvious that there's been a lot of infrastructure dollars coming, hopefully from Washington for some time, and so we decided that we would waste our time, we had no problem doing that, and we would work on a design. So we worked with Northeastern students, and in a few weeks they came up with this stuff. So just imagine what they could have done in months with professionals. But Northeastern students found that we could, in fact, provide all the buses for the new electric buses that are needed to address the environmental justice issues that the T needs to address and has been very slow to do so. We can provide the housing and the retail and the other things that the community had also asked for and gotten an agreement from the neighborhood, and provide the services, and it would be right beside the park. It's not about not in our neighborhood, but it's like if we have the opportunity to restore parkland and provide these services, why would we not do it? Well, the radical idea that two state agencies coordinate, I mean, you guys know, it's not simple. So we're not there, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the things that we've been doing to try and move this conversation along. We've been working with many of our public officials. The state representative that this project falls into is retiring this year. So we're going to have a new state rep that I imagine will be very interested and engaged in this conversation. Two governors, former governors, have been bringing their voice to this. We've also got a lot of community members and others signed on. But I have to say that I think that the Northeastern students' work, sort of being able to look at this and come up with visuals, was a really big part of explaining to people that this was possible. And this has all been during COVID, so it's a little difficult to do the kind of work we might do. But we did put together a model, and there were folks there that didn't know if we could actually do this. But when they saw the pieces and we moved things around, we saw that it is possible. Now, does it require coordination? Yes. Does it require more agreements? Yes. Probably more paper cuts too. But this is the thing. And today, when we're working in parks, we're going to have to be at the intersection of housing, affordability, social services, parks, transportation, environment. It's not just going to be that we can just think about the parks and that's it. And I don't know if that should be the case. That might have been the problem in the first place. So that's the end of my talk, and I guess we'll have Jen come up now and next, and then I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see if this works. Oh, it does. Oh, and it's crazy colors. How exciting. So I'm Jen Mergle. I am the Director of Experience and Cultural Partnerships at the Conservancy. I just want to put out a disclaimer for the start. I am not a historian. I am not a landscape architect. I am not an urban planner. I am a curator, and I consider myself an educator, and I find great pride and pleasure in connecting members of my hometown to their history and making my hometown better. I have been honored to be invited by Karen to be part of her team in order to do that for this amazing and unique opportunity, which is the year 2022, when we have this confluence of events. And so my goal in the next 20 minutes is to give more of a high-level overview than Karen did in depth with the case studies about what we are looking to do for the bicentennial year here in Boston, knowing There is a phenomenal national effort being organized by Olmsted 200. Dee Dee, I don't know where Dee Dee is. Here you are, Dee Dee. Through National Association for Olmsted Parks in Washington, D.C., that is coordinating events across the continent. But here in Greater Boston, we're trying to be responsive to the particular present moment and the potential for Boston's future. So that said, we are interested in bringing the learnings that are being developed today, bringing the learnings that are being developed nationally into dialogue with Boston's present realities. And some of those present realities, as somebody who's born and raised in Boston, involve knowing that the city of Boston has a history of being siloed and segregated, and that we can do a lot of work to repair, and especially coming out of the realities of COVID silos, use our public spaces in a way toward connection and healing as Frederick Law Olmsted had intended back in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. So as we are embarking on the year, these are our foci that we know Olmsted is turning 200 on April 26th. We know that his legacy ideas, we're not focusing so much on the man. We don't even presume, as Karen said, that people know the Emerald Necklace was designed by him, or that the Emerald Necklace was even designed. But we do know that it can be a fundamental convening point or nexus for conversation around key themes and legacy ideas that Olmsted left to us. And so we distilled those down into the concept of shared use, shared health, and shared power in parks and public space now. And by now, we mean with what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the fierce urgency of now, because tomorrow is too late. So we are trying to take a justice lens on this work. When I say we are not doing this alone. And so what is important, Karen described a little bit about the history of the Conservancy. Its DNA is being founded out of an emergency, out of a flood in 1996. But it was a nonprofit founded with a number of individual neighborhood associations, community alliances, coming together with one voice as a nonprofit to coordinate with city, town, state, and federal officials to solve a huge problem, right? We'd like to use some of that DNA history in our work this year. So of course, first we reached out to our partners at National Park Service at Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site to say, hey, this guy chose. He chose to move from New York to Boston's neighborhood, to Brookline. He chose to move his family here. He chose to start the first professional landscape architecture firm here. Why? Right? There was a problem to be solved here back then, and how can we draw from that idea of problem solving now in the present? How can we do it together with others? And so this is a collaborative coalition effort. We now have over 119 partners, and I can share a little bit about that, to bring a conversation forward that is much more horizontal than vertical. It's not about one person, one date, one location. It's about the process of learning how to collaborate again after being separated for 2 years. So I don't need to tell people in this room about Olmsted, but again, as a curator and as an educator, I don't assume everybody in my hometown knows about this man. They may know, okay, founder of landscape architecture, we know that the American Society of Landscape Architects, maybe I've heard of that, or that the Boston Society of Landscape Architects was the original chapter. Yes, Olmsted was a design thinker. He then, I like to say, also considered himself an artist, and I like to think of the Emerald Necklace Park System as the largest immersive artistic installation across the entire city of Boston. But he had a phenomenal hand in how we think about design. Of course, he also, his writings then led to, with sons doing a little editing, what we have come to know as the National Park Service, right? The idea of conserving land, of preserving it, that it should be restored or saved or protected from development is something that he left for us, right? Many people may not know that he had a real sort of a preternatural idea about public health before there were even terms or science or words for it. So when he was head of the U.S. Sanitary Commission for the Union Army for the North, he knew to keep injured and wounded soldiers away with fresh air, getting them fresh water, et cetera, so that they wouldn't die of disease from their injuries. He knew to supply them in these ways and to connect people, not just wounded soldiers, to nature would be a way to improve their physical health as well as their mental health and, by extension, our social health. He put these in his 19th century terms before we had words for things like endorphins or vitamin D deficiency, et cetera. But it led to what we think of as responses like American Red Cross, et cetera. So that notion of public health is big. I think you all know he was a founder of The Nation magazine, and so this commitment to fact-based discourse about issues happening in his country, especially as somebody born before the Civil War and coming out after the Civil War, when the country was still so divided and needed so much social healing, and needed a space to talk about why it was that they were still divided. He was fully committed to that as a journalist. So I tell people about Olmsted in this frame, but through the lens of that largest book, The Cotton Kingdom, reproduced here, because many people may not be familiar with the fact that he had, yes, from 1853 through 1860, done all of this writing in the American South, thinking about how it is that people were being forced into labor in landscape in Southern slavery, and how that relationship was completely dehumanizing, but how you could have a more humanizing relationship with landscape. Many other scholars, much more dedicated as true historians and researchers than I, like Sarah Zodi, could speak beautifully about her firsthand research on the primary documents around Olmsted's journeys through the American South in what she will be publishing soon. But what I can share with broader audiences in Boston in talking about the bicentennial is that Olmsted's abolitionist texts, he compiled them together before the Civil War by 1861 and published them as the Cotton Kingdom with a real indictment, with a real justice lens against this moral argument for slavery that the South was putting out, against an economic argument for slavery. And it is said that it convinced the British to side with the North instead of the South. And so we want to focus on that reality of Olmsted's moment and take the learnings from that now into our present situation in Boston. I will be very clear. This is not a hagiography. We do not think Olmsted was perfect. He was a product of his time. And at the same time, we know that there are lessons we can bring forward to today. Here we are in Boston. Karen already shared the firm's plan of the Emerald Necklace Park system, as well as how it is mapped and maintained, a little bit broken, but almost still there today. Olmsted shows it was the height of his career, the end of his career, where he came to Boston to realize this project that connected Boston as more neighborhoods were being incorporated into the city and as the city was rapidly urbanizing and growing. He wasn't just thinking on the city level, he was thinking on the regional level. We know, he wrote to Charles Eliot and John Charles in 1893, and he was talking about this work as his quote-unquote most important work. Right, and by that he meant not just the system in Boston, but the Metropolitan District Commission. So he was really thinking, how can we connect people to each other? How can we connect a region and a community through parkland? And we also know, as Karen said, it wasn't just an endeavor to connect neighborhoods. It was also to heal a few sanitary problems that were going on in Boston at the time. So we know that we have a historic moment where we can mark the legacy of a man in 2022. He's saying decline any business that would stand in the way of doing the best for Boston all the time. We also have a historic moment in our city, so we have to be mindful of the present. We have new leadership in the city of Boston. We will definitely have new leadership in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts after this year. potentially the first female governor of the state, first elected female governor of the state. And so we know that we're in a moment where at least local leadership is saying we want Boston to be a Boston for everyone. So how can we work with the bicentennial and with work within the Conservancy to make sure we're planning for how we're engaging folks in the parks and for the bicentennial as truly an experience for everyone? We have to keep that in mind, and then we also have to know, of course, as we're coming out of COVID, these are articles, from our local paper, the Boston Globe, that are citing the relevance of parks as the one piece of infrastructure, the one place where people could still meet while houses of worship, places of education, places of commerce and business, everything else was closed. But people could come together in the parks and know that they were safe. Likewise, we have known anecdotally in Boston for decades, centuries, there is not an equal distribution of resources across neighborhoods. We do have neighborhoods that are significantly segregated and siloed. Karen showed you that map, and I'll show it to you again, of the breakdown of census data for neighborhoods. But research has also been developing, now that we can track folks' cell phone data, that being separated, especially during COVID, has disproportional negative and harmful impacts on our Black and brown neighbors in terms of violence rates, in terms of potential for economic mobility, in terms of education, et cetera. So us being separated is not just unfortunate, it's a serious problem. We do want to consider the bicentennial as an occasion to reconnect people and to meet people where they are at. And so it's not presuming everybody knows who Olmsted is, but it is inviting people to share their own stories about their park experiences, their own questions, their own observations about how experiences in parks have been in Boston, and to imagine what they could be. And not just creating programming and delivering it, but asking community members and colleagues, what would you like to see? What would you like to create if you had resources? And making that an authentic and intentional invitation to partner. And we want to partner at a few different levels, not just institution to institution, not just city to city, but on a grassroots, hyper-local neighborhood level. The term triple neighborhood disadvantage is from the article of Harvard professor Robert Sampson's work about the threats to Black and brown neighbors when they're siloed and don't have mobility between neighborhoods. And how can we use parks and green space as that nexus to bring people across neighborhoods and back together again this year? So this is our opportunity. Now, how do we choose to do it? Do we just say, we're going to program everything by ourselves and you can come if you would like? No, that's not a truly justice-based or equitable process. So we have been working since late 2019, and then obviously COVID hit in 2020, but to try to build a continually growing coalition of partners, and hopefully as multi-hyphenate as Olmsted himself was. So people who are thinking about design, people who are thinking about public health, people who are thinking about transit, people who are thinking about culture on many levels, and letting the bicentennial be an occasion, not just across a single day or a single month, but across a season, April through October, to really connect across disciplines, to give people an excuse to come together. Many of these groups we have found, many of these groups have found us, and we've invited them in with no barriers to participate. But we also want to focus with a hyper specific equity lens on some very intentional invitations. And so we looked to Stephen Gray of Grayscale Collaborative. This is Stephen speaking about the research that he did for us to create an equity framework for diversity and inclusion for bicentennial programming. And Stephen was, of course, somebody who himself as a fan of Olmsted and his impact, especially on urban environments with park structures, was thinking about how this can connect to our present and how this can be an opportunity for us to practice and learn a bit about how we can be a more equitable organization working in the space of parks equity. So this is Grayscale's analysis using the Conservancy parkland, the space that we steward of the Emerald Necklace Park system, as a case study to see where it was we could have most impacts in terms of really reaching out to community members and involving them in the process. Not only did he map the census data of the city, but on the right, you will see he mapped who was currently in the Conservancy's universe as park advisors, who was involved in park decision-making with us. And he was noticing, you have a lot of folks, understandably, up near where the Muddy River flooded, but you don't have a lot of folks in the parkland around Franklin Park, where you have the most acreage and the most population of individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous people of color. So what if you were to form a committee of neighborhoods? What if you were to create an ad hoc group by invitation to individuals who are already doing great work in shared use, shared health, shared power in parks and public space, invite them in, compensate them for their time, and raise funds for them to decide about the bicentennial programming, which we did. And we have raised the funds for them to put out a call for artists to give out for the bicentennial season. They're putting out the call in a beautiful way, I will just say, using sight and expression and artistry to give visibility to each other. So unsung voices, individuals across Boston who are great community organizers, great thinkers, who have concepts that could be valuable for the city, they want to cite their work in highly trafficked parks, very visible parks. And then creatives who have big voices in Boston, that may be a phenomenal mural artist like Pro Black or a concert organizer like Catherine Morris, they can draw attention to smaller or lesser known parks, green spaces that are important to neighborhoods but not highly trafficked or on maps for tourism in Boston, and give those sites attention through those artistic voices. So the Committee of Neighborhoods work and the partnership work are really important to the bicentennial. We also want to create a space for people to learn about what we're talking about. I do not presume everybody in this room knows what the term environmental justice or spatial justice might mean, but we want to create monthly dialogues for shared learning between us, and learning not just by experts who are speaking down at an audience, but learning through shared experience, letting community voices guide conversations based on the themes of shared use, shared health, shared power, but really inviting in more open conversation. We need to air the problems first before we can solve them. So we need to be a convening space for that and for potential imagining and learning about solutions. But the last part that we are, of course, very excited about is getting out of just the talking space and getting into some doing, getting back to getting together. And so we are, between April and October, once a month, convening people for experiences in the park together. And this is an opportunity for cross-neighborhood collaboration. Maybe somebody from East Boston, somebody from Mattapan, and somebody from Brookline can come together in a park along the Emerald Necklace Park system, where the Conservancy is offering the permitting support, offering the coordination, offering the promotion, and we're partnering, not doing this alone, with colleagues who are already doing great events in each one of these parks. So if it is BAMS Fest in June in Franklin Park, if it's Porch Fest in Jamaica Plain, with Dunamis Boston in August, we are partnering with colleagues already convening audiences and giving them additional support to build capacity and connection. So we want to also share resources. We're trying to make this low barrier and easy. So we've created a website where people can freely put out events that they'd like to host, as long as they meet the themes and the values of shared use, shared health, shared power. They can share stories. It can be a publication space. We've had our first piece of fiction on the website. We've also had observations about a child's first steps in the parks, a first kiss in the parks. Maddie has a beautiful footnoted piece in the website. And so it's a space where people can share ideas. We want it to be a communal, community-generated space of content that is as accessible as the parks themselves. We try to push that information out through some channels like social media and news, and we're sharing this administrative labor between the Conservancy and the National Historic Site, so that staffing time is committed to this mission, but we are also making sure we're inviting partners. If you want to do an Instagram takeover and tell people about your event, please do. We're trying to, again, make it a space of shared voices. And so these are basically the four sides of the square that we're trying to practice with for the year of 2022 and build on that learning moving forward. It is not, I want to acknowledge, Maddie, your own research. It's not the first time that somebody has, in Boston, even in particular, focused on parks as a space for cultural community connection and healing. I do want to raise out the voice of Miss Elma Lewis, who was doing that in Boston in the 1960s and 70s, who brought Richard Pryor, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Duke Ellington to Franklin Park for audiences of thousands, right? But we are building on Miss Elma Lewis's shoulders and not wanting to forget that history and the potential of Greenspace as a convening space for the city. So I will end here just with this reminder. We are trying to make the Bicentennial in Boston a collaborative process. The focus is not a product or a project. The focus is that process of learning how to collaborate again, how to partner more authentically, intentionally, collaboratively toward park experiences that can make our public spaces more vibrant, vibrant, and equitable for all. And of course, ready to take questions. Oh, I'm exactly at 0. And thank you, Maddie, for the time.
Yay! Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Karen. Our speakers have graciously allotted us like 25 minutes or so for questions. We might have some online questions, but we'll start with questions from the audience, and maybe I will ask one at the end if there's time. So who has questions for our presenters? Yeah, stand wherever you want.
While you're warming up for questions, I will mention the necklace is just down the road, so you can all explore it. But this weekend, Saturday, I'll be giving 2 tours, both of, I'll meet you at our visitor center, public restroom available, like to brag, and we'll be walking over to the glories of Charlesgate, and you get to see the now, which is the now before the after, and then later in the day we'll go and walk around Franklin Park and Shattuck Hospital, including the fencing and barbed wire.
Excellent. Okay, who wants to start? It can be me, but try to be nice. Okay, it'll be me. So I have a question for Karen, and my question is, I would love if you're able to talk about it. What was it like in 1949 when the hospital, when the space was taken for the hospital? Like, did the community talk about this? And if not, that would be something I'd be interested in knowing about. But
I mean, this is a great question, and I might have to phone a friend. Sarah Freeman's in the audience, but we have seen from Parks Commission records, which seem to be some of the most some of the evidence we have, that there had to be several meetings to try and push for this. I don't know of any reporting at the time that community groups opposed or reacted to this, but it may just be my ignorance. It may not be that, I don't know. I mean, this happened in a lot of cities, and these are neat. James Michael Curley, the mayor, had built schools. He built a lot of wonderful things. So I don't know if people maybe thought, well, this is great, we really need this, and they might not have thought it was possible to purchase other land at the time, or but I don't know. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't know the answer. Is that on?
The mic doesn't seem to be on for Sarah Freeman.
try again.
Try speaking again, Sarah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, there we go. I don't know the answer either, but I do have a sense that public process has gotten a lot stronger. Like in 1949, there might not have been neighborhood associations or the same kind of participation. For those of you, this isn't related to Olmsted, but anyone who lives locally, or if you want to see it while you're here, there's a famous interstate highway that was going to be built that's now the Southwest Corridor Park, and that's kind of in Jamaica Plain and the areas near Franklin Park. That was like a milestone in public rising up and saying, no, we don't want you to do this. So that's my best answer.
Thank you, Sarah.
I know Freedom House was founded, I believe, in 1949. Maybe they had something to say about it. But I'll look into it. We have an online question.
We do. So this question comes from Fran Gardino, and it's more of a question/comment. And it goes like this. How about creating a dedicated Emerald Necklace bus line connecting all parts of the necklace? So I'm throwing that out, I'm guessing, to you, Karen.
I love that idea. I will say it's a yes. We need better public transit, I think, to connect all parts of the necklace. It's a fact of history, and it comes from, I think, a good place that the parkways were originally designed for pleasure vehicles because you would just drive around for fun, and so buses are not actually, full buses aren't really permitted on the parkways. And because we know that that is a major way, a major tool of public transportation and a way that a lot of folks can access the parks, we've essentially limited the access by many of folks that need it the most to our parks. Perhaps they can go, get off the bus, walk 2 blocks, or roll. I mean, we have to remember everyone can walk, but we don't have a way that people can actually have the same experience as someone in a private car. You can, anyway, so yes, love the idea, would love to do it. I think there have actually been projects like that in the past in a limited way. These things are never really that inexpensive to do, but I would love to do it, and I'm getting to know the T a lot better than previously based on recent Arbor Way work, so maybe that's something we can work on. Thanks.
We have a question right there. Yes.
Well, not really a question, but a comment about another building on the Emerald Necklace, the city fire control building. Was there a big fight when that went up? And I don't remember when that was built.
That's a good question. I mean, again, I think we should inspect everything right now because it's all getting old. That building seems like it's in better shape than the Shattuck Hospital. I think it's 1920s. 1925, based on just its architecture. I haven't spent a lot of time studying it. Yes, we have an emergency fire control system in the floodplain, Boston. So it was built on the necklace, and they had to build a really big wall to protect it recently, very expensive wall as part of the Muddy River project. So I do not know what level of opposition there was at the time. And it's a great question. Maybe you should research that as well. We're just making assignments for you.
Okay. I think I saw a hand. You have a question, this gentleman over there.
Hi. Hello? There you go. So I was just curious, that one picture that you had, Karen, in regards to the plantings and the benches that were stripped away under the bridge. So I'm curious if you could expand on how the necklace deals with other public right-of-ways, utility right-of-ways. Is there some kind of cooperative agreements that offer trade-offs, anything along those lines? And then also in regards to grounds management, say, after they get in and rip something apart, how does that get repaired or restored?
Yes, so there are in theory, yes, when someone comes in, does something, there should be a permit, an agreement, some sort of arrangement between the organization doing that work and the public entity. So in most cases, that will be the City of Boston Parks Department, Brookline, or DCR, depending on whose land. The Conservancy, we don't really permit those things. Those are done by the public agency themselves. We know how to do that, and so we are, for example, with the Olmsted Now effort, we're facilitating and we're getting all the paper cuts and we're doing all the permits to allow for as much community involvement as possible. In terms of in the right of way, we regularly do tree work and those kinds of certain types of projects. So we do get permits and approvals to do those projects. I'm not sure if I totally am answering your question. What a lot of conservancies like ours and others will do is essentially get a permit in order to take temporary control of a site, renovate it, and then give it back to the public jurisdiction improved. So that's how we do a lot of our work. That's essentially what we're doing with our tree work. That's essentially what we're going to be doing with Charlesgate when we get to build parts of it. And that's essentially what we did when we renovated the Rose Garden. So we essentially, when we are doing that work, that's essentially legally how it works. I do think that a lot of times there are different jurisdictions that come in, dig up things. Sometimes they get the right permits, sometimes they probably don't. Recently, there was something that didn't have a permit, and they put a bunch of trailers under the Charlesgate, and then they had to take them away. You might be referring to that.
Those types of instances.
Yeah.
So then who has the enforcement?
So that's DCR. For most of the land that's under the Balk overpass, that is DCR. And sometimes people store equipment and do things under there with permits, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes DCR appreciates it when we notice and send them pictures.
The guy saw, did you have a question?
Yes, amazing presentations. That was an interesting question by Frank Gardino, who takes just amazing photos of the Emerald Necklace that are well known everywhere, even outside of Boston. And, you know, last night I went to Commonwealth Avenue and tried to follow the Muddy River upstream from Commonwealth Avenue, and oh my word, it was harrowing. So you folks definitely have your work cut out for you, and there's nowhere to go but up. So, you know, I was really glad to see that you were using the student work. As someone who works with students frequently, I think it's great to give students the opportunity to work on something that can have a real world impact, you know, instead of just sort of conceptual projects that, you know, people sort of invent for them. And speaking of student work, I guess my question is, a couple of years ago, a student won the ASLA Student Award for some work on Franklin Park, making the margins and edges of Franklin Park more permeable and welcoming, especially to some of the communities that may not have really good access into the park. But we also know, and it was good work, but we also know that student work can be somewhat conceptual. So I'm wondering how much of that work you've been able to incorporate, and when you see concepts like that, how do you evaluate them so that they don't have a negative impact on the Olmsted legacy, but yet they make the improvements we need for modern times?
Yeah. Well, that's the rub, you know, that's the balancing act, is to figure out the way that, you know, these kind of goals can be achieved, and that we also preserve some of the, you know, the important defining characteristics of the park. And so that, I remember that project. It was I think, very important set of proposals. There is right now an active Franklin Park action plan that the city is, you know, because of permitted shadow that was allowed to shadow a downtown park. A significant amount of funding has gone to Franklin Park through an agreement that the city arranged. And that funding is being used for a redesign or a set of improvements to Franklin Park that are being discussed right now. So if any of you want to be involved in that, I encourage you to be involved. And I know that they are thinking a lot about the edges. I know originally the Franklin Park Action Plan didn't even want to deal with the edges, because a lot of times those roads are DCR or another agency, and you know it's tough to come up with a plan that is, you know, being driven by one agency, but talking about land that is another agency's. But that's, you know, and that is our role, I think, to say, well, no, actually, the public doesn't really care what they're stepping on. They just know it's a road, and they'd like to get in the park pretty easy. So, you know, that's part of our role, to try and talk about those things. I think I saw Arlene's hand, maybe. Oh.
Did you want to do one from online first?
Yes. One more question from online by Al Hallows Gill. He's asking, or she, who can set personal cell phone use in quiet park settings policy? And can that quiet area be enforced? And also a question about masks in parks, and can that be enforced, or is it enforced?
Okay. Well, I also do not enforce park laws. Actually, once I was deputized when I worked for the New York City Parks Department, when I had the misfortune of having rollerblades. It was a terrible idea for everyone, including me. Anyway, but we do not do that. We do not enforce park rules. If there's something that's really egregious, we might call somebody. I think that this person's question speaks to the fact that we need spaces for quiet and for activity. And, I think Olmsted really thought about the spaces for quiet. I think in the last 50s and sort of in the age of modern recreation, we've been building a lot of the spaces for activity. And we haven't really been thinking about the spaces for quiet as much. And we sort of zone for activity, and we don't really zone for quiet and solace and those kind of spaces. So we have to be really intentional about, because it seems like a lot of times designers, probably myself included, spend a lot of time thinking about, well, where can you fit the ball field and where can you put the picnic areas? But you don't, and everything's just oh, well, that leftover stuff, that's good. They'll be quiet over there. And so, I don't think we have an answer for, enforcing quiet laws, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And then there was a second part of the question. Masks. Yes. So we put out a lot of signs. That's what we did. And we tried to communicate in as many languages as we can. The good news is that, nature, sunlight, air seems to kill bad things more than other things. So we have that advantage. But we aren't in the business of enforcing, sign protocols in the parks. And we hope that people are good and we model good behavior.
Arlene. Okay, one of the issues that we've all contended with, and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy has done a remarkable job in your tree work, but you're doing the tree work, and it is, I do think there's an educational component to it, but one of the biggest problems, and as a long-term member of the Muddy River Commission, or whatever we're called, is that having spent millions to recapture that waterway, we cannot get the planting correct. And the problem with the planting is both contractual and problematic, and also a lack of understanding of what to plant and how to maintain, and what is a weed and what isn't a weed, and what's a plant you can get. And I'm being long-winded here, but one of the issues is finding a park-based maintenance field with the pride of what they do and the skill in understanding what to do. And I'm wondering how the necklace is the Conservancy is involving itself in that collaborative effort, because it really shows between Boston and Brookline.
Yeah, Arlene, I think your point is very well taken, and it makes me think about what Chief Reverend Mariama Whitehammond talked about, that we have to really invest in maintenance, and we have to invest in the skills of the maintenance staff, and they are very underpaid. So if very underpaid, and these issues and the way that we compensate landscape architects at a certain level, which isn't actually that high for many, and maintenance staff in a different way is related to a lot of things. And I don't think I need to articulate a lot of the racism that's built into the way we compensate field staff. And so unless we really invest in that, we're asking the city to do some really important work, and I think that they want to, but I think that we know that in the city of Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we spend 1% of the budget on parks, and until we really decide we're going to change that, we struggle. And a lot of what the Conservancy does is try and advocate for additional investment, but I think we really need to think about whether or not we need to be advocating for changing labor rates, and thinking about how if you really want some wonderful folks, you need to invest in them. And actually, there's great folks that are working every day, day in and day out, on these landscapes, but they're told, that, anyway, I could talk about this way too long, but I mean, your point is well taken, Arlene, and I think we need to continue to do more.
Yes, please.
I also feel that there's great potential for, instead of there being division of labor, say, for example, between historians of planting and design plans and then field implementation and maintenance, for there to actually be more space for people to be able to collaborate and work together. And if there isn't an avenue for individuals to talk to each other, there are, of course, going to be gaps in communication and then process and then results. And so if that's not built into the process along the way, it's not going to be there, but I do think it's a solvable problem.
And there needs to be pride of task.
I think, and I guess I love the point that Jen is making. At my old job, when I worked in San Francisco, like half the job was to have the maintenance staff and the designers in the same room where they could argue. And that is really important. And when we have organizations that are stretched really thin, spread out over space, they aren't necessarily being able to say, you know what, you can't plant that because we can't take care of it. We planted that 3 months ago and it's terrible. It's all dead. And you need to have those kind of conversations, and I don't think that happened enough on some of the projects. But I appreciate everybody's thinking about this and pushing so we can be better the next time.
Got a question. We'll go here. We'll go there, and then we got you. We still have 5 minutes.
Hi, I've just got a question, especially with your Olmsted Now initiative. If you're looking at doing anything with the connection, let's say down Columbia Road from Franklin Park down to the South Boston Park area, which was originally a place of initial Olmsted designs, which have been, of course, elaborated upon so much since, Moakley Park and Carson Beach and all those places.
Yep.
But to bring those places into the Olmsted context.
Yeah, it's a great question. I just had an interview yesterday with a master's student at Tufts who was saying, is this the year, is this the occasion? And we were talking about the history in Boston. Again, I recall 9 years ago when former Mayor Martin Walsh, now our Labor Secretary, was promoting Boston as a potential Olympic city and arguing for the completion of the necklace or the greening of Columbia Road, which is very close to my childhood home, connecting Franklin Park to what is now called Moakley, or what had been Olmsted's Marine Park, Castle Island in South Boston. And I know it's complicated. That could also lead to development, gentrification, individuals who have for many decades been able to maintain community spaces, businesses, residences, and then the greening of those spaces could lead to individuals not being able to stay in those neighborhoods. I want to credit Garrett Dash-Nelson for speaking very thoughtfully about this last night and including a map of the original design connection between Franklin Park down Columbia Road to Marine Park in South Boston. And I'm not an expert on the history, but do understand there were several reasons why that was not completed. One, in terms of Olmsted retired in 1895, the project wasn't complete, he couldn't continue to advocate, lack of funds with the city, I think there were a few hurricanes involved early in the 20th century, redlining, a number of reasons why the project wasn't completed. But what we would like to do is to make Olmsted Now an occasion to have dialogue and conversations about that, to open up the conversation about how could you actually authentically have a real community discussion as opposed to only a developer discussion or a top-down discussion on what that would mean, and how that could be funded and paced with real input. It would be amazing to start those conversations this year, and then I have to defer to the urban planners and the people who have architecture degrees to actually know what the length of a process like that would take and what the cost of a process like that would take and why we would invest in that process over another process. Doing the cost-benefit analysis of what could be meaningful for the city at large. But what I will end with is we are very in sync and in dialogue with colleagues at the other end of what would have been the completion of the Emerald Necklace from Salt to Salt, or from the Charles Tidal Basin at the Fens over to South Boston. And so colleagues who are working on Moakley Park We are on the Olmsted Now website. If you look on our calendar, we're posting events for a lot of activity in Moakley Park. We're working very closely with Boston Harbor Now and with colleagues in South Boston. And one big project I'd want to promote is related to Boston's history called Rights Along the Shore, and it's an exhibition that opens at Boston Center for the Arts on April 2nd. But it's 2 contemporary artists exploring the history in Boston of the 1973 Wade-In in Boston, where residents, melanated residents of Boston and visitors to Boston who are African American tried to use the beach at Carson Beach, which would be at that point near Moakley in South Boston, or the space of Marine Park, and had rocks thrown at them, and were met with violence by white residents of South Boston, and so chose, instead of a teach-in or a sit-in, chose to march and caravan from Franklin Park to what would be Carson Beach and wade into the water, and again were met with state police violence. And so the bicentennial is an opportunity to surface that history and for artists to facilitate conversation and healing about that history. And we need to face that for us to be able to move forward with really thinking about parks as equitable spaces for everyone.
And our final question right here.
Patricia O'Donnell. I just want to start with saying that great presentations. It was really interesting, both of them. I think the justice, equity, student work and the BIPOC analysis were really cutting edge kind of stuff that we all need to keep doing. We've worked on 55 or 6 Olmsted legacy projects over the years. One of my first was the Emerald Necklace Master Plan of '86. And I walked the Charles Bank. So it's great to see, it looked like that then. So it's great to see that it might look different. I wanted to say that I think it's really important that planning and design includes management and maintenance, and it's often not in the contract. And in our office, we often ask the client to add it. So I think it's really critical. I know that in one of our most recent projects at Jackson Park, we worked with the Army Corps. It was a natives-only 500-mile radius project. So how do you do Olmsted in natives? It was a really interesting collaboration. But that landscape, from the beginning, they said you have to be able to manage it. So the question of not having enough people or hands on the ground, the question is, what are the tools you're going to use to manage it? So I would just say that there are some maybe new ideas about management and maintenance and how we might be able to achieve it. But the last thing I'd like to say is, do you have an endowment? Have you started to build it? And if you haven't, you kick it. And if you're already doing it,
we are soliciting donations, so it's good to hear that. Thanks for the shout out.
Now.
So we yes, so the Emerald Necklace Conservancy has been raising dollars for maintenance and for these kinds of projects for many years. The last 15 in the name of Justine Mealiff, Boston's first female parks commissioner. And, Yes, she, in fact, apparently at the Charlesgate site, after we'd gone through a year of planning and figured out where we put the playground, someone was like, that's where Justine said the playground should be. And I said, why didn't you tell me? It saved me a year and a half of planning. But so we've been, we have an endowment, essentially a fund that provides regular funds for our maintenance, but it is 1,100 acres. The Esplanade is 17. So we've got a lot to do, and we do it with partners. These parks are the responsibility of the public agencies, and it's our job to challenge them, support them, and do more. And I totally agree that those kind of maintenance concerns and funds need to be built into projects. And I think that's part of our job to say, when you're spending $28 million in Franklin Park, how are you going to, provide for maintenance? I mean, I think it comes down to a lot of the challenges we have in our city budgets, where bond dollars and capital dollars are plentiful, but actual, dollars to pay maintenance staff are very differently funded and structured. I know we're over time here, so I'm not going to keep talking about city fiscal problems, but they are massive, and you see the gap.
Thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you for the Q&A. Good questions.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back here just about 3:15.